Billions of dollars are flooding into our region thanks to gigantic opioid settlements. And the Spotlight on America team is investigating just how those funds are being distributed. Now, if you haven't watched that report yet, we have it on our homepage, WCHS-TV.com, and on our YouTube channel. But now, we want to dive even deeper into this major issue for Appalachia. Angie Moraski joins us now from Washington to break down the Spotlight on America investigation. Angie, thank you for joining us today. Now, Angie, we saw a lot in your report about what's happening in Ohio.
Happy to be here.
Did you find things are similar in other states, or is there a lot of variance?
Well, you know, part of the problem here is that it is indeed different in every single state. Each state had to come up with its own formula, its own way for distributing these funds. And it is a lot of money. The total for the opioid settlement distribution so far right now is about $55 billion, upwards of that even. It's going to be distributed over the next 18 years. And each state has to come up with its own way of distributing that money. Now, like in West Virginia, what they've done here is they've created a not-for-profit foundation to distribute about 3/4 of those funds. About 25% of the money ends up going to local governments, and 3% is being held in escrow for legal expenses. But every state comes up with a different way to get that money out. And this particular report that we did looked at grassroots organizations, the people who are closest, boots on the ground, to dealing with this crisis over the past decade. And they've been having some difficulty in many states in accessing these funds because the process that's been established in some areas is pretty complicated to apply for the funds, and they have to compete with the bigger players. So we looked at Ohio in particular, where there were 8 grassroots organizations that ended up joining together and hired a grant writing company to apply for them, and they are still waiting for those funds. And that's the other concern here, is that so much money has yet to really go out into the community to help people. And that's happening while the crisis is still going on as we speak. We're seeing 110,000 people a year roughly die every year to opioid overdoses still in 2023.
And Angie, that's still a huge number. So during your investigation and what you've uncovered, what seems to be the biggest holdup for states distributing funds?
Well, just establishing a process for many has been a difficult part of this. As we saw in the report, about a dozen states right now don't have money being distributed to grassroots organizations because they don't have a grant-making process yet. Some money is going to local governments that the state is handing out, so that money is trickling down. But the overwhelming majority of funds in some of these states has yet to even go out. We talked about West Virginia. West Virginia State established this not-for-profit, the West Virginia First Foundation, and they finally named an executive director to that board just this past March, which was March of 2024. I understand the settlement was reached at the end of 2021. The first funds started going out to states in 2022. So 2 years in now, West Virginia has finally gotten a leader for the West Virginia First Foundation. I've had the opportunity to speak with him. He was a board member and now is executive director, Jonathan Board. He's very passionate about this and feels very strongly that the money should go to the community and to the people closest to the problem. And you, of course, know that West Virginia has one of the most serious problems with opioid overdoses in the nation. It's 3 times the national average for overdose deaths in West Virginia. So this is such an important issue. And this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to use this money, which is totaling about $1 billion for West Virginia alone, to go into the community to try and make a difference. Now, part of what they have to decide is, where is that money going to go? And there is somewhat of a roadmap for that. The settlement MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, basically lays out that it has to go towards abating opioid addiction. So what does that mean, abating opioid addiction? It has to go to actually do something to lessen opioid addiction in your community. So that means what people refer to as harm reduction services, things like handing out naloxone, which is the overdose reduction medication. When somebody overdoses, you give them naloxone, and it can reverse the overdose. Even some controversial things like handing out clean needles to communities or safe use sites so that individuals can use opioids in a place where if something goes wrong, they can be saved. So there is much debate over where the money should go. Some say it should go to law enforcement for drug outreach and things like that. Your community will have to decide that. Your West Virginia First Foundation will be making those decisions. And when I spoke with Jonathan Ford, who's the new executive director, who literally has only been on the job for 2 months now, he started June 4th, it's very important, he says, that this money actually go to the people who are closest to the problem in your communities who are suffering. Because the thing you have to remember is that hundreds of thousands of people had to die before anyone in these states across the country received this money. This is part of a settlement because of all the opioid deaths.
And Angie, you just mentioned abating the opioid problem. Needles and also naloxone, very controversial topics, not only here in West Virginia, but in other parts of Appalachia where the opioid crisis is rising or has risen. Do you see much success rate in your findings, interviewing people?
Well, you know, we've had the ability to speak to people in various states. We went to Michigan, in fact, and we spent some time at a harm reduction facility, the RED Project there. And the point that they make is that, you know, you can't do anything to help someone unless you gain their trust. And a lot of folks who may be using opioids don't want to come forward unless they gain your trust. So in those cases, they are handing out needles, they are giving naloxone, they are trying to provide services as well. So when people come in for these different types of things, they talk to them about establishing housing and potentially getting into treatment and things like that. So it basically provides the opportunity to talk with people who may have substance abuse disorder and try to make a difference in their lives and try to help them. But by the same token, we spoke with a sheriff down in Florida who felt very strongly that that may just encourage people to continue using. But in some cases, we've seen money going to things like buying police cruisers or body scanners. And the critics will say that that actually violates the spirit of the settlement because this money is supposed to go to things that actually help to stop opioid use.
Angie, your report highlights the sheer number of applications. Does that actually bring with it an increased fear from government leaders about potential fraud?
Well, you know, there's always concern about fraud, but the organizations would and the states would say that's why they are taking a slower and deliberate approach to this. You know, even more so than fraud, I think they are trying to decide, you know, what is the proper use of these funds. It's a big debate. As you said, it can be controversial in any community. You know, what is the best use of these funds? We saw in the 1990s, the big tobacco settlement that was much larger than this, nearly $300 billion. But at the end of the day, what happened with that settlement was that the majority of those funds did not go toward nicotine addiction and helping to abate that or stop that. The money ended up going for things that were totally unrelated, shoring up state budgets and building roads. So that's the real big thing that they don't want to see happen here. They want to learn from the mistakes made during the big tobacco settlement, and they want to make sure that this money is actually spent to help save lives.
Angie, I have one more question for you. You know, you mentioned in your report opioidsettlementtracker.com. Is that the best way for people to see how these funds are being spent in their states and even in their backyards?
Well, you know, opioidsettlementtracker.com is a wonderful resource because they have all in one place how much each state is getting in settlement funds, and that's like a rolling number because it increases as more settlements come in. And the person who runs that, the founder of opioidsettlementtracker.com, is attorney Christine Minhee, and she really has her finger on the pulse. She keeps track of how much each state is getting and tries to create some transparency for where those funds are going. That's why the newest thing, which we highlight in our latest report, is the grant tracker. And that's because they wanted to make sure that some of this money is going to those grassroots organizations. Their goal was to level the playing field so that the money doesn't just go to the big players who always get the money, but the actual mom and pops who have been fighting this battle on the front lines. They've lost their loved ones. In our story, we talked to a grandma who's now raising the daughter of her son who died of an opioid overdose. And so much of this has fallen on the backs of loved ones who've watched their loved ones die and suffer through opioid addiction. They really understand what is needed. And many of them have started grassroots organizations to try and help others. And what this grant tracker will do will give those smaller folks a resource that they can go to. They can see, okay, is a grant making process in place? What do I do? How do I apply for it? So in that sense, it is truly a wonderful resource for people to go all in one place because, you know, as I said earlier, every single state does this differently. In Ohio, they're doing it differently than they're going to do it in West Virginia, in Pennsylvania, in New York, in Nevada. Wherever you are, the process is different. You know, in West Virginia, 75% is going to be distributed through the West Virginia First Foundation. In Ohio, that number is 55%. So you can see how it can be so confusing for an individual who just wants to try and help make a difference. And once again, this is a once-in-a-lifetime effort to try and help stop the number of people dying from opioid overdoses.
And Angie, making a difference is exactly what Spotlight on America and you in particular are doing, especially with an issue that really hits home to people right here in West Virginia. Angie Moransky with Spotlight on America, thank you so much for sharing your report with us. Have a good day. Thank you for watching, and here's another video to watch from Eyewitness News. Just click right here to subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell notification for the latest.